I set up a Zoom with two with my computer, but I didn't have to. I set up a Zoom with two with my computer, but.
Where did you see the second one?
Face is on the TV now. Backwards. And flips it backwards.
Well, I haven't seen you for a long time. Long.
I'm not seeing the 842 number. Can you snap a picture of it and send it to me? Just of the whole paper? Thanks. It's just two numbers out here, but I can't see it. Said something that Michelle printed out for yesterday on the second meeting number. She sent it to me.
Yeah, 5641, is that what you have?
Yeah, 5641.
Hey, Dale.
Debbie, did you send that?
You're muted, Debbie.
Yes, Ben, I just sent it.
Okay, thanks.
In the hole, it's taking time.
Got it.
All this time.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that wasn't my phone.
The state's coming out with all sorts of crazy stuff about it. It's now it was when everybody was really,
Yeah, I was just watching that on the news. They had an all-time high again today.
yeah, on new cases.
Yeah.
And it was 488 cases
Today.
in one day.
Just today.
Oh my God.
That's where.
Hey, did you send me a text?
Yeah.
You mentioned that today.
I haven't seen you for a while, Dale. I didn't even recognize you without your hair.
Yeah.
Who's that guy?
Exactly.
I thought you maybe sent me my mistake.
No, I meant to mention.
Okay.
You guys are welcome over. Man, talk about awesome seminars. Holy cow, those were a hit at my house. I got lots of family and they went through them. It's so funny, I go to Lynn's Market the other day and they had some there. Oh, those are great and bomb. Just hard as rock. Yours are all fluffy and.
Is there, tell me what you've been up to, or is it gonna shoot?
We got a side business for you. That's better. Oh, it feels like reclines.
You got my stuff today?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's another individual that appreciates that as well, because my calculation wasn't nearly as friendly.
Oh, really?
Well, I tried to reference the impact fee study, and it has ERUs in it for
Right.
projects.
Right.
I was referencing some section that I didn't have much confidence about, but it did say RV parks. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because my number is conservatively high already.
Uh-huh.
because you have, the one discretionary piece is going through the tables and the state charts and really determining if it doesn't actually directly fit into a specific category, what it is. And so in that case, it was sort of, is it an RV? Is it, you know what I mean? And I just took the higher number of any of the categories that halfway made sense and felt like they were defensible. So anyway, yeah. See how that shakes. I mean, wrapping that up is good to hear that that's coming in.
That number you gave me, is that on 100 or 120? Do you remember?
100.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And that number is also based on, you know, again, we're not looking at an actual map or whatever. It's 100. I assume some amenities associated with that, because usually one of that size, you know, there's a little clubhouse or something. Sure. There might even be a swimming pool or whatever. Laundry. Yeah, not knowing. I just did it kind of the way that the Gooseberry calculation was, very similar to this one. So anyway, yeah, that's, yeah. Yeah. Did you find the executed agreement?
You know, I've seen it before. I didn't have
No, that's fine.
3 minutes to find it.
That's fine. I actually have an earlier version that I could just pull. Because I think that's going to be the basis for anything that we discuss going forward on that. They were threatening a lawsuit at the time we did the purchase.
This is UCCU.
Yes. And they're just super aggressive in terms of their approach to managing their affairs, so to speak. I just based on the information I have, I would put my money in that but you know, I do appreciate how, you know, they're watchdog and all that stuff, but they were really, really hard.
Granted, I guess if they're not protective of their assets, maybe it would be a good thing to put
Well,
money
see
in
that,
credit union.
exactly, see, that's the flip side. Having said that, I think they're paying a host of attorneys, sitting in some huge part of their program to chase all this stuff down. Whether that actually pays off is debatable, I suppose. But they were, where I was going with all of that is they are in the agreement as a specific.
Do you know what the number?
Settlement item, and my brain's just agreed to 30 connections.
So is that inclusive of impact fee?
No.
It's
No,
just
it's just the connection.
physical.
Just the fact that.
Dale goes out and installs the meter.
Right. No, sorry, back up. No, it was just talking about the water right, or the right for them to have water in our district without having to bring additional water rates to the table. I'm really sure, well, I'm really confident that we didn't agree to offsetting impact fees, because that there's a bunch of money on the table. Right. And that wouldn't, yeah. And I don't think we negotiated connection fees, because that's a real cost also to us.
Okay.
I think what we negotiated was water right waivers within the context of what Apple Valley and Cedar Point were bringing to the table. And they actually had to add water rights. So the district was actually held harmless in terms of that aspect of it. We didn't want to be hanging out, having to fill the coffer when they came back and said it's time.
The hour is right.
Here we are.
I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Big Plains Water and Sewer Special Service District. Will you please stand, we'll pledge allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, starting with
Present. Marty Lisenby, present.
Harold Harris.
Danny Bass, President.
Jerry's here too. He's unmuted right now.
Okay, Jerry.
Jerry Jorgensen, present.
Okay, everyone's here. Thank you, Jerry. I'd like to acknowledge our engineer, Rod Mills, and our water superintendent, Dale Harris. We were both in attendance. Consent agenda. Board meeting minutes for April 2nd, 2020. I have read them and I'm good with them. I don't know if everybody else has been through them or not.
I move that we approve minutes.
Second.
For April 2nd.
Aye.
Aye.
Jerry?
Aye.
Okay. The minutes for April has been approved. I'll move on to staff reports. Dale Harris, would you tell us what's going on as far as the general lay of the land with the district?
Everything's rolling pretty good. We're using a lot of water over in Cedar Point. I've had well 59 on, running about 65 gallons a minute since May 5th. I haven't shut it off. Using more water than normally use over in Cedar Point. Other than that, we got a water connection in. I've got my consumer confidence reports I've got to hand in by the end of this month for all three of the systems. And I've got to get all of my last quarter for the last part of the fiscal year of all of that sampling. So that's what I've got going on this month, is getting all of that paperwork in and that. But other than that, everything seems to be rolling along perfect. Like I said, it's summer, so things are up and down.
Okay, I appreciate that. Rod, I think we'll just kind of move on down and involve you in these other discussion items. Item number 3, which is the discussion of the Cook well. We have discussed it at length, and we have awarded a contractor to do some work on it. But funding has been the issue. Could you fill us in on where we're at with that now?
So, as you'll all recall, but just in terms of just quick summary, the Cook well is in the aquifer area associated with well 59, but was not specifically mentioned in the original agreement with the State Drinking Water Board. And so there was some question as to whether we could spend money on Cook well from the well 59 funding. So we did, we have done everything that needed to be done and was part of the contract with 59. Had some money left over, even after the source protection plans for the wellheads that are in that area, including Cook well, were completed. So we just sent, I just sent a request letter to the Drinking Water Board asking for a change of scope to allow us to spend the remaining funds on the Cook well. And I just checked in with those guys a couple of days ago, and they have approved the change without board motion or any of that additional protocol because of the number was modest in terms of what was left in the fund. That the actual letter that supports what I just said should be arriving here any day. Today, well, not today, but it should be arriving anytime there. It's drafted. I spoke directly with the director, said, I've approved all of this and sent the draft letter off to get it, put together for my signature. And you guys. So that final and formal acknowledgement is on its way. So that's really good news, from my perspective. We can do what we need to do to get our backup well online,
Just compliance.
and in compliance, thank you, for that part of our system. We just, it's really a critical aspect of what we got going on. And in light of the report that Dale just shared about the amount of water well 59 is pushing out in the usage, it'll be great and very reassuring to have a redundant supply, although not as good as 59, as we all know. But at least we can put a little bit of money into that and get that online again. So pretty excited about that.
Okay, with that in mind, I called Russ and asked him to go ahead and spend that money that we have approved, so ask him to tell us what that is.
What do we know what the number is? What's after we pay for the source protection?
Well, yeah, we can get,
We
yeah.
know roughly?
22.
Huh?
22,000.
Okay, so I've looked over, where we can separate out the plumbing and the pump house and that stuff that we'll do in-house. I'd like to get with you, Dale, and then we can firm up that. But as far as the pump, the VFD and, all that stuff, then we have the money to do that. So let me get with Dale and then I'll report back to you.
Okay, have you ordered the same tracking and stuff?
I told him to go ahead and get you the sand separator, because that takes about a week or 10 days to get in. This stuff a lot of lead items. So yeah, hopefully we can have that in next couple of weeks then.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we've got things in the pipeline and we'll get that going.
Yeah, hey Dale, what's the improvement on that well? Is that gonna improve the output?
Yeah, I think that,
I mean, with no problem.
I think that we'll end up with getting 30 to 35 gallons a minute out of that minimum. Hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers for more, but I think we'll at least get that. So that'll up our production, because I can run both of those wells at once to about 110 gallons a minute over there. I can't run 59, of course, all the way, because I have to have that happy spot in the aquifer where I just start pumping air into the system over there. So I can't run that, as max as that, because I think I'm 75, 77 if I can run, but it only lasts a couple hours, and then I just start pulling 2% milk basically out of it.
I had a question from the audience. Where is the cookbook physically located?
On the bend of, what is that, 2000 south and 1800 east over in Cedar Point.
Denny, just enlarge on your question. With the Cookwell having a VFD, a variable frequency drive, when we get that in, we can turn it up and see if there's more water in that well. And if there's not, we turn it back down. So we build in the opportunity to gain more water if it's there, and if it isn't, we turn it back down. So.
And how valuable that is, having that information for me, that is the difference between me keeping 59 online and not keeping it online. Because if I didn't have that real-time drawdown, I'd be washed of where I was losing, getting the good water and not getting the bad water. So like Ross said, that's why I say that I think we'll get 30, 35, but we'll see with the VFD and with that running and having that automatic, not that automatic, but having that real-time drawdown will help me out considerably where I can run that at.
Okay, well, we're on the home stretch, hopefully and with the hot season continuing, that's a good time to get that going. We'll go to number 4, unless anybody has any more questions on the oil. If not, we'll go to number 4, and it's USDA RD water project, which is the Canaan EWAC grant money. Rod, could you bring us up to speed on where we're at with that?
Yeah, also pleased to report that things are moving along really well on our end. We have completed a preliminary plan set for the spring rehabilitation. We're working on the government required documents that go along with that. They have a specific requirement and a specific set of documents. So I can't just pull our standard specs and our standard details and our standard bidding instruments on this. And I knew that already. It's just, it is a bit of an additional effort, but it's kind of the price for doing this project this way. So no complaint in that regard, but so it's, we're well through the federal government paperwork, so to speak. The pipeline project has not, we have not completed the plans on that portion. Partly because I wanted to wait till the very end for that piece because we only have $150,000 straight up. And I want to put as much into the other portions of the work and understand how much that's going to cost us. And then I'll know really how far we can conceivably go. But we're going to over-design the pipeline regardless. My intent is to have a reasonable design instrument from the connection point on the springs all the way to the tanks. But we will not be building all of that with this one. Based on my calculations, we're going to get about 3/4 of a mile or so with the piping, with the number that they were able to allocate. So that's still in the works. And then the next step, once those pieces are done, and I think in the next couple of weeks is the time frame for that. We will be submitting all of that information, the technical documents, the bidding documents, and the drawings and construction plans to USDA. They have 30 days to do their review, make comments, then we'll make the changes or whatever will be needed. Quite honestly, based on the effort we're going to make sure that these documents jive with our project, and there's no conflicts in the drawings versus the documentation and so forth. I anticipate that will go smoothly, but they will very well take the whole 30 days because there is a brand new guy coming on board as the state engineer in Utah. And this actually could possibly even be sent to the engineering group in another state for review because they're just so overwhelmed with just the changes that have happened in their staff. So 45 days or so from that point is about where we are, and then actually we'll be free to sit back down. I do want to have a workshop with the board when that is complete and go over the bidding requirements, what the project looks like in terms of actual implementation, and to see if we can't get a consensus on all the approach that we're taking on that, and then out to bid and go.
Just,
I got one. Do we have the Rollers Alliance approval to run equipment up that trail now? Do we get the okay on that?
Do we have who's?
The Wilderness Alliance?
Oh, yes, the BLM issued a letter to us, it's in the file, indicating that they approved our construction plan, which involved a track hole, which is going to be necessary to dig the thing. And I'm still worried about that. We're going to require trench boxes and other things, just for no other reason, just a little extra safety.
We're gonna have to do a lot of work on that road, just getting up to it, aren't we, Jeff? Yeah. So take the track go up there, it's not gonna go up there the way the road is right now.
No, the track, well, I just pointed that on is, Matt Jessup. He did a lot of, you remember when we crossed the water up there?
Yeah.
You know, he set that big rock, that was kind of the big thing, but a track hoe can essentially just walk right up there. Now getting, like he's saying, trench boxes, getting all of that up there, that's gonna be, yeah.
Yeah, so there will be some issues related to that. I think the approval that BLM gave me, and super worried about sending a letter because initially they wanted us to haul everything up. And I'm not kidding, and we talked about this, but with horses and what have you. And I really wanted to cooperate as much as possible with the whole wilderness thing. I'm a tree hugger at heart. At some level, it just doesn't make any sense, I guess is where I'm going with that. So I took a shot at it in terms of just is going to be necessary to do that job efficiently. And that included a couple of the larger style backhoes, some truck hauling and, trench boxes and what have you. And it's all in a big list that I prepared for them, and they did approve. And it's in writing.
So the timeframe on submission, you think is about 2 weeks, is that right?
To get back to get our instruments back to USDA, it's a couple of weeks, maybe before we're off.
And that's all done as far as we know, completed, submitted in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Just for everybody's peace of mind, all of this is 100% grant, in the $700,000 range, so, it's not coming out of our operating budget. So that's a good thing, we're able to arrange that. Moving on to item 5, Dewberry project update. That's on.
What?
In the last week or so have put their water in the water bank. They put 83 acre pool, 50 acre feet is still for them to use wherever they happen to decide to use it. 25 acre feet is dedicated to the project on the hill. And so there's that water. I looked over the documents last week and sent them back. And I think that's a done deal, isn't it, Ron?
yeah, so the water rights agreement, to put all of the water rights in our bank is signed and executed. We haven't recorded it yet. But so that entire asset is going to go into our bank, which I think is really good for all parties. I'm pretty excited about this because it will further support the water rights aspect of our system, and really increase the asset pool. And at some point, those water rights will be available to the district for just the general functioning of the overall program. Although, of course, allocated to their project, because that's the requirement that was made. All of this is completely consistent with the development agreement with the Big Plains board and Gooseberry Development. So those numbers are right out of that development agreement, and everybody was really good and pretty excited to get that moved along. And I'm super happy about it because it just there's lots of reasons why it's a really great thing for the district. The least of which is that we're getting that allocation of water rights free and clear from their development, which to me also indicates that they're moving along and they're wanting to press forward. And that the other part of the agreement that I should mention is the 25 is ours unless the development doesn't go forward, in which case it did make sense, and I concur with this as well. If they don't end up going forward for whatever reason, they have the right to extract those rights from the bank as well. But the truth is, I don't think they're going to do that anytime soon. Even if this development in this way were to get changed or whatever, and I don't see that happening either at this point. But it's good news all the way around. It's really been a good positive thing for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Rod. appreciate everybody's input. At this point, I'd like to turn the time over to Ben Billingsley and Matt Kennedy for the presentation, RCAC rate study presentation. So if you handle that, Ben, we'll watch it.
Hey, Matt, you have been unmuted.
Yep, I should be unmuted now, I think. Perfect. Great, well, yeah, if it works for you, I've got a little presentation here just on the rate analysis that we did, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. Ben, it looks like the host is disabled screen sharing. If you could go and change that for me.
Okay,
Perfect.
go ahead. Yeah.
All right, let me get this presentation pulled up, and you should all be seeing a presentation now, right?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Well, thanks for inviting me here to the board meeting here tonight. So for those of you that aren't aware, I've been working closely with the district here over the last couple months to complete a drinking water rate study or a water rate analysis to figure out what the system's expenses are and really what revenue needs to be in order to meet those expenses. So my name's Matt Kennedy. I work with RCAC, or the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. So we're a federally funded nonprofit technical assistance provider that works with rural communities throughout Utah and the Western US to really help maintain compliance with rules and regulations and build system capacity. So we did a rate study in this case to, really at the request of the mayor here. He attended one of our workshops in the past on sustainable utility management and thought it'd be a good idea to really look at where the district's rates are currently and where they should be to cover the system expenses here. And so when we do a rate study, we want to make sure that a system's able to stay solvent. A lot of times rate studies might be required when you apply for a loan. We want to prepare for asset replacement in the future. And we want to make sure that the system is covering their debt service so that all these kind of come in together to maintain the system for future generations. And really, if rates aren't high enough, if they're not raised to where they need to be, the system's going to have further reliance on grants and loans in the future. There's going to be a reduction in existing reserves, and eventually the system won't be able to pay their bills, maintain the system, and ultimately could result in receivership, another entity taking over the utility. And so as a board here, really you have that fiduciary responsibility to, as you know, to keep that system running both in the short term and in the long run for future generations, and making sure that staff have the resources that they need to do their job. So when RCAC conducts a rate study, we kind of have three guiding principles. One, we want it to be sustainable, making sure that the revenue coming in will cover all those expenses and that the system can continue to function. It also should be equitable, making sure that we don't have any one customer group subsidizing another. And lastly, that it's justifiable. We're not making up numbers here. All these come from the system's financials, actual use, and really projecting rates that will cover the expenses that are needed. So the rate model that we use, it's based on American Water Works Association standards. We've developed this model extensively over the last few years, and as we put in information and get information from the system, that's constantly being reviewed by staff. So I'll say take the budget, put it into the model, and then review it with Ben to make sure that what we're putting in is going to be accurate for not just this year, but as we look towards the next 5 years. And then back in, I believe it was May, we had a workshop with the board here to discuss kind of what we found and get directions from the board to kind of proceed with a final rate recommendation here. So in the model, we take a look at system assets. So everything that's, in the ground and above the ground. We look at the system budget as well as actual sales data for the last year. From this, we work to figure out what are the system's expenses, where does revenue need to be, and what are some of these opportunities we have for setting rates to cover those expenses. And from this, we come up with a 5-year forecasted budget, and then go back and work with Ben, work with the board to figure out what is an appropriate combination of a base rate and a usage rate to bring in the revenue that's needed. So one of the things we look at here are the system reserves, and the 4 main reserves that we're looking at are debt service reserve, operating reserve, emergency reserve, and a capital replacement reserve. So the debt service reserve here is required by lenders, whether it's a USDA loan or the bond covenants from a loan with the state revolving fund. There's a certain amount of money that is required to be set into a restricted account that the system cannot touch unless it's needed for, say, a final year's payment on a loan. For Big Plains here, that target is 238,000. However, depending on when those loans were taken, there's a certain period of time to build up that reserve. For example, you have 10 years to build up their reserve requirement. And so that's why, even though we have only existing reserves of 116,000, there is still several years to build up that target. Operating reserves here, this is 1.5 times the expenses accrued during a given billing cycle. And really, it's needed to be held on hand in case there's a situation where, for whatever reason, the system does not receive any revenue within a given billing cycle. It gives that buffer that's needed to kind of overcome that gap in revenue during those kind of seasonal fluctuations or unforeseen circumstances. And for Apple Valley, that would be $19,480. The emergency reserve is also an AWWA recommended reserve, and this is either the critical equipment replacement cost or kind of a historical cost associated with responding to an emergency. And after working with Ben and Dale, we found that 18,000 would really be probably an appropriate amount to this, and that with that reserve available and quickly accessible, the system would be able to respond to most emergencies. And this is something that would be built up over about a 5-year period. And then lastly, capital replacement, or a short-lived asset reserve, that goes by a couple different names. But really, this is a reserve that is based on what you have in the system, saving money to replace it when it wears out. We have a couple different ways of looking at that, which we'll get into the next couple slides here. So the capital replacement reserve, typically it's going to be based on the evaluation of all the assets in your system. Valves, hydrants, pipes, wells, those all go into a list. We look at what the expected lifespan is, what that replacement cost is going to be, and how much the system is going to be able to afford to pay for that replacement in the future. In this case, we wanted to also make sure that we were looking at the requirements from USDA and state revolving fund loan conditions. And so USDA from a previous loan has a requirement of an annual contribution of $6,666 to a short-lived asset reserve. The state revolving fund also has a requirement of a 5% of O&M expenses contributed annually to a capital facilities reserve. And after discussion with both those funding agencies, it was determined that the acceptable amount would be that 5% of O&M expenses, which is $6,769 in this case. And so as we plan for the future, for right now, that is the minimum amount that has to be contributed each year. And it provides the system with a good starting point to be able to look to fund those short-lived assets in the future, as well as potentially prepare for replacement of larger assets. The budget that we used is based on the 2019 budget here. We adjusted for inflation for our 5-year projections. looking at an inflation factor of 2.3%, which was, the most recent forecasted inflation rate. We include the reserve requirements, again, the debt reserve requirement and capital facilities reserve requirements, which are required by your funders, as well as that emergency reserve. And then we also take a look at other revenue streams, impact fees, connection fees, and interest income that is planned. So when we break this down, we look at fixed and variable cost. The fixed costs here are those that don't change with the volume of water sold. So for example, insurance, personnel cost, debt service, and asset replacement. For the most part, whether the community is using 100 gallons a day or 1,000,000 gallons a day, these costs aren't going to change. And that's about 94% of the system's cost, which is what we see with most systems. These variable costs here, those are the ones that change as water is sold. So for example, electricity. If the community is using 100 gallons a day, you might not have to turn on your well, but if they're using, say, 10,000 gallons a day, that well might have to flip on, which really increases those expenses. And for Big Plains here, that's about 6% of the system's expenses are those variable ones. So what this comes down to is that really base rate should be used to cover those fixed expenses. The base rate is one that comes in every month, no matter how much water a person is using, because those fixed costs, again, they don't change with the amount of water produced. And that would leave those variable expenses to be covered by the usage charges. So we'll talk about that theoretical base rate in a moment here, but when we plug that in, we look at as well kind of a forecast on sales. So we plug in a conservation adjustment or a conservation factor here. As usage rates increase, customers typically will put in different conservation factors. Maybe they'll water less, maybe they'll put in a low flow toilet. And so we see that in those first few years, there is a small amount of conservation. However, most people don't change their habits very significantly. And these tend to go back to normal within a 3 to 5 year period. We also looked at community growth. So in this case, because of Big Plains' system of standby fees moving to full customers, in order to account for that, we kind of increase this community growth factor because that really looks at how much water is being used each year. And so that helps us estimate as the community grows, both from new connections and individuals moving from standby customers to regular customers, we're able to account for that growth in the model. So kind of jumping back to the base rate we discussed is when we do this model, we look at a theoretical base rate here. And so this is a base rate that's based on meter size and not customer category. And really it's looking at what is that meter's demand on the water system. And so when we break down the customers by meter size, we can allocate out system expenses based on individual meter demand. And so when we take a look at all those fixed costs that the system has here, we are able to come up with this theoretical base rate. And so by looking just at system expenses that are fixed, we see that a 3/4 inch meter would have to pay about $113 a month just to cover the fixed cost in a water system. Now, obviously, $112 as a base rate is very high and not something that we're going to look at moving forward. But if the system wanted to cover all fixed cost, that's what we would have to look at as that base rate. So once we plug this in, we wanted to look at a few scenarios here and also see what trajectory the system's currently on. And so really this first one is, what if we don't change rates? What if we don't make any changes here? And this is really going to cause the system to run out of money. When we look at this 5-year forecasted budget based on all of the current expenses, reserves are going to be completely depleted in about 2.5 years. And so, this means that bills aren't going to be paid. The debt service and capital facilities reserves are going to be drawn down completely. And it's really, this can't happen. So we need to look at where does revenue need to go and how do we get there? So an alternative that I presented to the board last month was looking at increasing that residential base rate to $58 a month. And but thinking back on that theoretical base rate slide, you know, applying that as a percentage of that theoretical base rate, so about 52% of that theoretical base rate, what does that look like for 1-inch and 1.5-inch customers as well, to keep that allocation fair across the board? And so with that increase, that 1 year increase to $58 and a 2% increase on base rates after that, we're able to generate sufficient revenue over the next 5-year period. And so this is just a breakdown of what those rates would be. For most customers, the only change that they would see would be on that base rate going to $58 with no change on usage rates. And so in that situation with that first increase and then a smaller 2% increase on base rate after that, the system is bringing in revenue each year. It's not, these first 2 years, there's not a full contribution to the reserves based on the calculations that we've done, but that's made up for in the following 3 years and really brings in the revenue that is needed. However, after this presentation with the board, seeing what it would really cost customers here, you know, the average bill would go up by about $30 a month. The board wanted to make sure that rates could be kept as affordable as possible while still bringing in the revenue that's needed. And so, excuse me, the board wanted to take a look at what it would look like if the residential, that 3/4-inch customer, was increased to $49 in that first year. And so applying that same, again, that percentage across that theoretical base rate, you know, that would be $83 a month for a 1-inch customer and $163 a month for a 1.5-inch customer, again, based on their potential demand on the system. And so by putting in this first increase to $49 in this first year, we wanted to see where do we need to go to, again, get a balanced budget over 5 years. And so by plugging those in with a 6-inch or a 6% increase in base rate and usage rate for the next 3 years, we are able to end up with a balanced budget over 5 years. And just the asterisk there is just, however, that is reliant on pretty significant impact fees coming in this current year or this next year here. And so without those, you know, rates would need to go higher in order, again, to get the revenue that's needed to cover all expenses. So with this increase here, again, you can see for most customers, it would be that increase of their base rate to $49. Coupled with that 6% increase annually for the next 3 years, the system is able to bring in sufficient revenue. There is, in 2022, you can see that we have a net gain, and really that's showing that while we are putting about $4,000 to our reserves, we should be putting away $34,000 that year to our required reserves. So the system is definitely short there. However, if that extra $90,000 does come in this next year from impact fees, that does create enough buffer to kind of cover that shortage here. And so ultimately, the impact on your residential customers here is they are going to see an increase in their utility bills. It's about $20, $21 this first year in their average monthly bill, which is about a 40% increase, which is definitely, it is a definite increase here, but it is needed to bring in the revenue to keep the system going. And so when we look at that, we also want to consider, you know, what is affordable. Most standards say that 2.5% of median household income is kind of that threshold for affordability. And so when we look at that with a median household income of about $45,000 in Apple Valley, we see that this first year increase brings that affordability index to about 2%, up to 2.46% by year 5. And so really, this is kind of that threshold of affordability, but it is needed in order to bring in the revenue to keep the system running. And so it's ultimately it is a very difficult decision. You know, the board does want to make sure that rates are kept as affordable as possible. And so with that $49 increase in this first year, it is a big increase, but it is needed to keep the water system running. And so really, you know, I would support that $49 increase here, coupled with those annual increases in the following year to make sure that revenue is sufficient, both in the short term and in the long term. And that kind of concludes where we currently are in the rate study here with this recommendation. And so, Ben, do you want to open it up to questions that either the board or myself might be able to answer?
Yeah, I'll leave that to Carol. Chairman.
Matt, the only thought I have at this point is that the tiered rate, that's a good thing to keep in mind, but I'm not in favor of locking it into anything at this point. We'll put it in our budget, our proposal, the rate increase for 1 year for the $49, and that will be the end of it until we see a definite need locally to make another move. But we won't lock in any future increases into the service district. So as the resolution that we will be passing, or at least considering tonight, the last time there was any change was when the service district came into existence, which was in February of 2012. So we've been over 8 years since we touched this, which with inflation and the expansion of this, that, and the other is a pretty good hallmark for the district and the concern, the approach that we've taken on it. But again, to cut to the chase is that we'll lock in one increase and see what the future years hold as far as growth in the community and so on. That would be my thought on it.
We have a question posed as to, prior to opening public comments, we want to allow the public to ask questions specifically regarding the study that was just presented. Or would you prefer that those questions be asked during the public comment?
I think it hold on to those questions and we'll lump everything into one session. And that might answer several people's questions at one time. Anybody else have anything they'd like to? Okay.
Well, to me, Mr. Chairman, we've gone as far as we can, as cheap as we can. I mean, we can't do more. I mean, we've done, sweat equity on repairs and install. We're going to do sweat equity on this next cook well to get it going. And I think you've done a great job over the years to try to keep everything down. But we're at a point that the impact fees that we have hoped for to come in haven't come in. And I think what this study is telling us, and the graph that Ben showed us when we had that meeting, when you look at that graph, the expectations of what we were going to get and what came in didn't add up. And so we've just been in basically kind of a crisis thing. To me, it has to go up. I don't like it. I don't think anybody likes it, but we got to deal with the facts. And the facts are, we just talked about these other projects. Hopefully they'll come in. If they don't, what do we do? Turn off the pump? So, I mean, we're just at a point that something has to be done. I'm still hopeful, and I agree with you. I'd like to see the 1 year, one-time thing and not build into 6%. And let's be hopeful and let's go after these people and get impact fees to make up the difference so we don't have to come back to the public for more money. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I hate to have this conversation, but I hate to have the conversation that the fire department went out and hooked onto a hydrant and didn't have any water in it. We're at the point now where we're trying to keep everything in super good shape. And Dale's trying to get a consumer confidence report out that puts us in and reports that we're operating in glowing terms, but we're not gonna be able to do that next year or two. And rather than wait until the hammer falls, we're trying to get just a step ahead of this and get some money in the bank and get things paid for before we do have some issues to deal with. So, as far as impact fees, I think Ben has a list of something in the ballpark of $400,000 worth of impact fees that would be coming into us if the project's actually developed. I've got a list at home of almost $600,000 where people have said, I'd like to do this, that, and the other. How do I go about it? I'm going to drive by and look at it. If it pans out, I'll get back to you so I know that hopefully think, this guy's going to call me back someday. Well, that was 3 years ago. And so we continue to hope that something happens and it doesn't, and we can't put anybody in jeopardy hoping that something will happen. The Gooseberry people have been excellent. They paid some impact fees, certainly appreciate that. Aaron Stout on his project paid some impact fees, and some others have, but we need a consistent growth pattern to float this boat without an increase. It's not happening, and we've lived on hope as long as we can. So as much as I hate it, this is the least awkward conversation to have until we have a train wreck and then have to talk about it. Anybody else have anything before we move on?
I think one thing is we definitely need an increase, but I think we should tie in the option of a percentage increase in the next 5 years. Not putting a number with it, but have it there just in case, because I know things are going to happen. And if you look at a 6% by year 2025, the water bill will be right around $72. And that's still cheaper than a lot of our neighbors. We're not saying we're going to do that, but I think we still need to have that in there in case we have to, 1 or 2%. We may not do anything. And if it gets to the point where we can't rely on impact fees, because that's a guess. We're hoping we get the impact fees. If they don't show up, we still got to pay the bill.
Well, the outlier on that I can bring up would be Gooseberry Basin Preserve. If they continue with their project and you have 110 cabins up there, their water bill basically increases substantially. What's the equivalent on that? Probably like having 15, 20 home connections, basically.
20 plus.
Somewhere 20 homes hooked up. It'd be that equivalent as far as the increase in revenue. And if we have that increase in revenue, it could be that we don't need an increase.
That's true, but that's an if.
Well, that's the point, though, is that we can review this next year at the same time. And then we, have to look at it again and say, hey, our revenues, this and that project came in, our revenue's okay. We could go one more year at the same rate, that kind of thing. So.
Good example is we have a project that if we have to run a pipe about 20 feet to hook onto theirs as soon as they're ready, and we will automatically have an impact fee of $90,000. And all they've got to do is say, we're ready to go. And I carry my phone with me all the time, and nobody's home. And so that's just kind of what we're dealing with, is hoping that maybe we can pay the bills. We've been out checking the phone booths at the end of the year for so long, trying to scrape the nickels and dimes together to make it over the hump, that it's just getting that if anything else happens, we'd have a hard time doing it. And when you're that far in debt and you run out of money, trying to borrow money is difficult.
And ran out of phone booths too.
Yeah. So anyway, any point is well taken, but I agree that we can pick this subject up anytime we need to. Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to
The only thing to kind of add on that is, when it comes to rate setting, rates are something that you should be looking at, every year as part of your budgeting process to make sure that you're bringing in the revenue that's needed. And so, like you said, each year revisiting these and seeing really where the system is and where changes need to be made. And, as the system grows, there is always the option to again lower rates in the future. Rates don't always have to go up. They can go down as there's more users on the system to spread out these expenses.
That's a good thought. I appreciate it. I appreciate your input. Dan, did you have anything else with your sheet?
Did you have a couple slides?
I do have a couple slides, yeah. If you want me to go ahead and share those.
Well, if it's, I'm not sure what your slides
Yeah.
are. I just think maybe.
And sorry, Ben, just to confirm, there's a few questions in the chat box. We'll be addressing those after your slides.
Yeah, so I just, if Jason's listening, he did put a question in the chat box, and I took note of that to address after the public comments. You can also ask the question during the public comment period. Thanks, Matt.
Okay, thanks.
I do have a few slides that may be appropriate after public comments too, because it'll probably address some of the questions that came up last time. So,
All right, we'll move on. I appreciate it, Matt. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stay on for the public comment here. I know there's some questions specific to the model I can answer.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. We'll move on to item 7, which is public hearing. Before I open the public hearing segment, there's a couple of things I'd like to mention is that we'll entertain comments from anybody. If you could hold them down to a minute or 2 or 3, and we won't answer any of the questions. We'll make notes, and then after everybody has made their comments, then we'll address the comments that have been made and try to answer everything rather than spend the time of answering each individual. It'll take an awful long time. And then if after our summation is completed, if we haven't covered it, then we can go back and hit a few. So don't expect us to respond other than appreciate the fact you said something. And we'll go through with that. Another thing to keep in mind is that we'd like to put in a hardship clause into this increase. If anybody that feels that this increase has created a hardship, that they can demonstrate that, they can bring that documentation in or their issues. And it won't be a setback of the $20 and you can catch it up. We'd like to approach it on an expungement basis or forgive the debt, but it has to be something to prove that it is a hardship. If it is, then we have a listening ear. We're not trying to cause any issues, any problems for anybody. With that being said, we'll open this meeting up for public comment on the proposed base rate increase.
I think for administration purposes, could I suggest that we move public comments first to the people in the room, and then we move it to everybody electronically? We have quite a number of people that are on Zoom, so if we do first people here and then people on Zoom.
Okay, Rich? Rich Osowski, 10.4 West Hill, anyway. Yeah, just a couple questions. 20% is a lot. I guess even after 8 years, the rates haven't been raised evidently. So we're basing this, I guess this is more than that. So we're basing this because of the, I'm just throwing the COVID-19 into it, because the impact fees are less now, and we're figuring in the future there will be less homes being built. If there was more homes, suppose the Gooseberry Reserve goes up, and you got the 20 homes capability up there, the equivalent, then will rates go down. So that's a 10 increase for that. And also to think about it, has Matt ever seen a town or any place in the United States where rates have actually went down on a town. I don't believe that will ever happen, but maybe he knows about half a dozen towns rates have gone down after a certain amount of time. And, also, for those that can't pay, when we went to this tier system, there was a few people couldn't pay. I paid their water bill.
Could I ask you to come up here?
Oh,
We're having a hard time, the microphone's right here,
okay,
and some of the people are having a hard time hearing. So
That's
having you a little closer would help us. Thanks.
okay. We go back to that last question. When the rates went to the $25 at one time, before you could pay and use as much water as you wanted, you paid $25. Remember those days? Well, those are long gone. So when we went to the new system that we are in now, there was a few people couldn't pay. I paid their bills on a couple of them, at least for a few months. Is there some type of system for the people that can't pay, that won't get their water shut off, or they're worried about it, or they can't, maybe they need medicine? This is a big increase. So that's a question. And like I said, for Matt, has he ever heard of a town where the rates have went down? I've never heard of one, but there's possibly a half a dozen of them. And also, how much does the impact be? Suppose the Gooseberry Reservoir goes, and we got 20 extra homes equal to 110 cabins. Would that be a possibility rates could go back to where they were? And I guess the impact fees, that's a big thing for future homes that are out there, and maybe that would help the rates right now. That's it.
Thanks, Rich, appreciate it. We'll see how many of these things are duplicated and then address them. Anybody else? Margie?
Margaret Ossowski. My voice carries. Okay, my question is, I got a couple of them. Is the commercial, what are the commercial fees going up? Are they going up the 40 or 40% too? That, and I'm kind of, this one, how many customers are behind in payments, and are any impact fees behind? Do we got like outstanding bills that could be collected? And then the other one I have is in 2018, the water district was in the black. In 2019 was a record year of building and impact fees. And in 2020, we're in the red. What happened?
Okay, we'll answer that one in a bit. Anybody else have anything?
Christy Jorgensen, 1412 North Apple Blossom Lane. My question is, have we exhausted every option, or is this our only option to look at? Is there anything that we can look at that's outside of raising the bill? I don't know. I know that I heard that we purchased this water. Is it something that's necessary? Did we have to purchase it? The water district, have we got anything from them to see where they would be, what they would offer for us? I don't want to go that direction, but I want to look at every option before we start tackling these homeowners. And then my other question is what happens to those people that have multiple? I have 4 meters. That raise is significantly, that's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt me bad. So what are we gonna do with those people?
Thank you, Christy. I got one. This is the only exception, only one round per person. How you doing, Rich?
I made me forget it.
Okay, well, you're the exception, so.
Oh, I got it right now. Quick question. This is just, as far as Matt's concerned, could it possibly, after 1 year, and we see we can't make the projected, would the rates could go up then? After 1 year, we see, well, we don't have impact fees, we don't have this, we have another
COVID-19 hits us, could come around, would it be possible to look at it again and we would be looking at another rate increase? And I guess that's for that. That's just what if.
How's your crystal ball, Matt?
Yeah. I don't know what the future will hold, but the service district is a nonprofit organization. We're required to hold enough money for emergencies and to pay replacement costs of things, but we'll get into that later on in the answer period. So, anybody else in the audience? If not, we'll go to the Zoom folks.
I do have one comment. It's about the percentage. And Barrett Nelson, I live over in Cedar Point, 1396 Cedar Drive. You guys are proposing this rate increase, and you keep saying it's 40% or 42% or whatever. I don't know who's doing the math, but they're doing the math backwards. They're doing the math from the 49, from the already increased rate, instead of from the 29, from the lower rate. $20, the $20 increase, right? Isn't that what's being proposed?
So within the, well,
So percentage of $29, $20 of 29 is more like 68% increase.
Base rate.
Yeah, that's the base rate.
And
68% increase, not a 40.
and I can answer that real quick. So that's looking at the average bill, including usage rates in there. It's not just the base rate, which is why it's the 40% increase. So while the base rate is increasing greater than 40%, the overall average bill, including usage, that's what we're looking at for that percent increase. It's the average bill, not just base rate.
So where's that information? Where can I see that?
I don't have it in the presentation here. I could pull it out of the rate model here though and send it over to Ben.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to see that because, you know, the information we're giving is based on the base rate. That's what the decision today is about the base rate. Right? And it's being proposed as 42% base rate increase, and that's not right.
Anyone else in the audience who has comments?
so for the Zoom audience, I would suggest you raise your hand digitally just to keep things organized. That's a function of, oh, so we have our first here. We've got two. Looks like we'll go to Russ and Cheryl.
Good evening, folks. Can you hear me okay? I've got about 4 questions. The question 1 is, did the rate study include evaluating current expenses to identify any possible savings? Or did they only look at rates to accomplish the outcome of obtaining the necessary revenue? Second question, I did not have a chance to review this latest budget proposal, but a previous budget proposal included adding a new staff member. And is this appropriate while asking for a rate increase? Third question, can the RCAC accomplish audits of the SSD? If not, we think a third-party audit should be committed to in consideration of any rate increase based upon some previous decisions made by the management group, such as special deals to developers if they pay by a certain date. Can the RCAC conduct a review of what are the pros and cons of the Big Plains Special Service District being absorbed by, say, another entity such as the Water Conservancy District, so that the public can be well advised on all possible steps that might be considered moving forward? And those are all that I have for tonight.
Okay, Russ. Get back to those.
We have a JD that is being unmuted with his hand up. Go ahead, JD, state your name for the record.
Hello, 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 hello. Oh, that's a lot.
You can only have one sound source open, and she's got two of them.
Okay, so we will mute JD and go to.
There we go. JD is.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Great.
Okay, I am calling, I have a request.
State your name for the record.
Oh, Joan Deneen. So I have a request from the board. I'm calling for the removal of Mr. Jorgensen from this board. During last night's planning commission meeting, Mr. Jorgensen called a member of our community a faggot. This was a highly offensive and derogatory attack. This behavior cannot be tolerated from a public official representing Apple Valley or any other public entity.
Okay, Janine, I think we will have to address this in a different setting. If we could do that, that would be good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else on Zoom that would like to make a comment, feel free to unmute yourself. So we have one from Jason, Jason Graham, who asked if somebody gets, why are all the financial models from the study show a decrease in revenues? And that's something that we can address with the questions. Oh, yep, okay, from Kate. Sorry, Jason, go ahead and unmute yourself, or I can unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and state your name for the record.
Kate Van Hewley at 1262 East Red Sage Lane in Cedar Point. And I typed my question, but I'll read it as well. I understand that there's significant revenue raised through impact fees. So my question is there some way the residents can be assured that no more deals will be made like the one with Zion Tiny Homes that resulted in a large amount of money given away? It sounds like the water district could have used that revenue and that would have been important.
Jason Graham, go ahead. Oh, Jason Graham does not have a microphone. Feel free to type it in the chat box and I will read it aloud. We also had a comment from Anthus, who asked, doesn't the system need to be able to operate without impact fees? I understand that the impact fees have to be spent on specific projects, not on operations. Is that correct? And we can address that. And Jason, we will address that question on the decrease in revenues in the financial model.
it on,
Yes, it appears to be.
okay. Anybody care to start, on this? We'll just start at the top. Rich was wondering about, covering hardships. Maybe I can answer that since I brought it up. Yes, there have been a number of people who have had hardships. There have been a number of people who help other people, which is a good way to do it. Anybody that comes in and says that, I'm 3 months behind, I've been locked out, what can we do? We have done financing, we have done all kinds of things to make sure that they're not inconvenienced. Dale will know more about that, and Ben would, because they deal with that end of it. But Dale, are you aware of anybody that's been harmed by the lack of payment?
I haven't shut anybody out for a long time. Given kudos to Ben. Ben does a really good job of getting a hold of people and works with people. And if they've got problems, Ben and I are on the same page that our job isn't to create a hardship on people. So Ben and I actually spend a lot of time communicating with these folks and making sure that they still have their water and that arrangements are made. And I honestly can't remember the last time we actually locked somebody up. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, we go to great lengths to try to help people get things together, however, whatever form that takes.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if that graph that Deb has would be good to show the answers to a lot of these questions.
Sure.
Would that be possible to do that? You know, that you showed us before last meeting.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to do is just show our cash model. Where is our cash position? This is actually cash in the bank. The green line is where we've been for the last year, and the red line is if we do nothing. So come January with no change, the district is negative. With the $10 base rate increase, and this is assuming impact fees are received at the same rate that we've been receiving them for the last 12 months, which is about one impact fee for 2 months. So with the $20 base rate increase, we are actually still negative. So I mean, it's just barely $20 base rate increase from a cash perspective. The district is barely scraping by. With the $29 base rate increase, that would have been sufficient with the current rate of impact fees. So I mean, even with this $20 base rate increase, the district is still not going to be full of cash. It's going to be still squeaking by, but hopefully squeaking by with a little less dependence on those impact fees.
Yeah,
Just
there you have it, where the money goes and where it needs to go.
Mr. Chairman, on the question that Rich Osowski asked, we come up with a ballpark number at least, or as far as what conversation we had earlier, where the government considers like 2.1 or 2.2, whatever that number is, as a threshold of where they like to have a water bill for someone that's doesn't have very much income. And so, does that make sense?
Yeah.
To be a little more specific is, so we would have some financial disclosures brought in by someone and do that calculation. I don't know the exact number, but it's around 2.1, 2.2% of that income is what they consider affordable. And so if their water bill was higher than that, then we would forgive it over that based on that model. So it's not just a matter of if you have more time, talk to us. It's more exact than that, that someone on fixed income can get relief based on that. And it's not a loan, it's not a case when you can, it's just a forgiveness. So.
Yeah, Margie, did that answer your question as well? If somebody's behind on payments, if they're not able to make payments, we'll work with them.
I was just wondering if there's any extra fees out there that, could be collected to, put in your little comfort.
No, and we'll go into this question about tiny homes. And that relates to how that worked. How the fees work. So I don't know of anybody that owes us anything that we haven't had our hands on yet.
Just the Gooseberry Mesa Preserve, they don't owe us yet, but when the pipe's in the ground, then they owe us about 90 grand. So, but that's not owed yet.
Okay, and then,
the other question he had on that is for Rich was another rate increase in a year. For Rich Wisniewski.
that's going to depend on a number of things. I would doubt it. I think that we have enough in the pipeline that if we stay on course with the impact fees, if we're careful with our budget and we continue to grow gradually, that we can grow our way out of that. That's been my philosophy for the last 8 years, and we haven't made the grade. So we're trying to stay out of trouble and raising that $20, and we want to do that one time only, if we possibly can. And if Gooseberry and a number of these other developers come in, we can push this way down.
I don't want to interfere, but we could even go another 8 years, right?
We could go forever, hopefully, if we can get the growth has been our issue. You can stand in front of the Chevron station and get the same view you could have 10 years ago. It just hasn't happened. And so someday it will, but with this rate, as the graph indicated, we can stay out of trouble. We won't have any mad money, but I think we can make it with it without any additional increases.
What was last year really a record year for impact fees?
Yeah, there were 2 large commercial impact fees collected last year. That was a question that came from the audience.
Right. And, yeah, that's an anomaly on the graph that we were paid $60,000 by the Gooseberry Preserve people because of preliminary impact fee. There was also some other impact fees that came in from the developer.
That's not even accurate either. That actually came in May of 18, or it was May of 19 is when it came in, which was actually that 18 to 19 budget when that money came in. And it helped us to not be too short that particular year. We were still short that year. And so that didn't even count this year. Because that's why we've only collected so far 55,000. That was 60,000 by itself. Otherwise, it's 115,000 on the office right now. That helped us out though.
We want to formally close public comments and maybe just take each of these questions one by one. I took note of every question that was addressed.
Okay, let's, if there's no one else, I'll close.
I got one question for you. Have you guys considered impact fees and rate increases as pushing some of these people away to go into different directions and developing elsewhere? That might be why we're losing some of that too. But
Yeah, we're between a rock and a hard spot. If we lower them, the bubbles come up faster.
so as on the base rate, if it goes up, is the gallon usage on the base rate before you go into, is that going to change at all?
It'll stay the same.
It'll stay the same. So then after you use so many gallons, you're still going to get charged to add on. That one is with it.
Sorry, just your name for the record.
Just McKen. Wrong way.
Okay, that's it. We'll close the public hearing and just go through the questions. So if you could bring the questions up, Ben, we'll hit those.
Yeah, I added most of them to the question list. So let's just start from the top. I don't know if you just want me to address the questions. So the first one was, why does the financial model from the study show a decrease in revenue? And that is a result of that we have reasonable assurance of a $90,000 impact fee in year one. That's the Gooseberry Preserve project that is we talked about earlier in the meeting. It is likely to move forward. So if you chart out the revenues, Jason Graham from the audience pointed out that it looks like it goes up and then down. And the reason for that is because we have this one-time large sort of windfall of impact that we're anticipating.
And Ben, in addition to that as well, there is that remaining grant fund of about 43,000 that was discussed earlier. That's being expended on source protection plans and well rehab. So that's in there as revenue, but it's also zeroed out in the expenses.
Okay, we have another question and this one was from Anthus, asked, what can impact fees be spent on? So this was where he said, I understand impact fees have to be spent on specific projects, not on operations. And this is an interesting one where impact fees are very specific in how they can be spent. He is correct in that they cannot be spent on operations, but in the case of the special service district, they can be spent on debt service because our debt service is how the full system was acquired. So a new user that comes into the system is paying their portion of the acquisition of the water system. We do have a resident engineer here that could expound on that probably better than I could.
That was a great summary.
I think you're right.
So the next question is, are the impact fees less now because more homes aren't being built, more homes are not being built as a result of COVID-19? Our rate of building in Apple Valley has stayed flat for the last 4 or 5 years. We're pretty consistent in how many homes go up. We've not seen a spike as other areas in the county have. Another question was directed to Matt. Have you ever seen anywhere in any town in the United States where rates have gone down?
And so I'm actually working with another system up in northern Utah right now on a rate study, and they're in a position where they have to take on new debt right now to put in a new well. However, they have an existing loan that's ending in 2 years, and so they have to increase rates today in order to cover all those debt service expenses. However, in 2 years, that's a $100,000 a year note that's falling off, and so they're looking at decreasing rates once that goes away. So there are situations where that can happen. It's not common because everything continues to get more expensive. So it's usually not out there. For Apple Valley, it would likely be in a position where if there's a sudden expansion of the population, more connections going on without an increase in the size of the system, that would be a situation where rates could go down. Or if there's fewer loan payments in the future as those loans sunset and there's no longer that expense, that would be the other opportunity for rates to be able to go back down.
We do have one loan that will be going away in 2 years, and it's not a very large one. Nonetheless, we done the aquifer study that we did some time ago.
So the next question was related. That was the one where Gooseberry goes in, will rates go down, and that's very connected to that response. So I addressed that as well. The next question is, are commercial water rates going up as well? And this is actually a great question. It's something that was not incorporated into the resolution as it's drafted. I'm going to suggest that if action is taken tonight on the resolution as it's drafted, that we increase the other base rates proportionally to the treatment wage base rate. And then we can, if the motion includes that, then we can redraft it up for the town council. So another question that was addressed to the board is, have we exhausted all options prior to increasing this rate? One of the comments was looking at the Washington County Conservancy District.
Marty, you want to go more?
I think I'll take that one, if you don't mind. So I did some homework. And, my water bill last month, I used 61,770,000 gallons. And, the bill came out $168.37. And so I called up my father, because I thought he would be in Hurricane. Come to find out, he's in Washington County Conservancy District. He used 46,276 gallons of water, and his bill is $256.79. So it's over $100 increase for 10,000 gallons less water. Is what, and his is not Hurricane, it says Washington County Conservancy District right on the bill. And I've got a copy of it on my phone. But going to the Conservancy District and having them buy us and having them take over, that's the kind of bill you got. And that's because they're running it like a business. We're like this Boy Scout troop. We're all volunteers. Nobody gets paid for doing any of this stuff except Dale, and that's it. And as someone else mentioned, why are we hiring somebody else? Because Dale's doing everything, and sometimes Dale needs a day off, and we need a part-time guy. But it's and we haven't hired them yet. But everybody else is volunteers. This guy here, Russ Graves, and even Harold Merritt, they're out there with their boots on and helping him, volunteering. And so it's kind of like, because we're nonprofit and we have volunteers that are helping kick in on this stuff, it's not like we haven't gone out and bought a new truck or anything like that. It's just, that's what it takes to just pay the bills. And the one thing that Harold mentioned to me not long ago was, everybody remembers when they put those pipes in the ground. You know, those pipes today are absolutely twice as much money today as when you put those in the ground. And everything costs more money. You see it at the grocery store, you see it everywhere else. And that trickles on down to us. You know, we have held the rates down longer than possible when we I've been doing some work on some of the budget stuff, and basically we've got some money in the bank, and that account balance keeps getting lower and lower and lower. Today, it's critical. And anyway, I hope that answers your question on Conservancy District.
Conservancy District water. Some water in person.
So the next question is, what happens to the people that have multiple meters?
Okay, you have several options. One is you could continue to pay on it, and that still counts toward the impact fee, and use it as basically a savings account that those things would be paid for. And if you sell a property, that value would be part of the property. Another one is you could, if you chose to, you could quit paying that impact fee, and the money that you paid in will be credited to the impact fee whenever it's used. So if you paid in $5,000, you'd have $5,000 credit on an impact fee. So you have the option of continuing to pay and using it as an asset building device, or stopping on 1 or 2 or 3, but you're not losing your money. The money will stay there credited to the impact fee.
So in the case of the Jorgensens, they actually have 4 physical water meters.
Yeah, that actually got connections.
So these are not water standby fees. Oh. But that does address the water standby fee question, which is
I'll leave that up to somebody else on that one. Dale, what if the water connection is there? It would be my thought that you could shut it off and quit paying the bill, and it would just keep on racking up.
Are you talking, yeah.
Christie?
Yeah, I mean, she stopped paying it, we just locked that meter out. But I mean, you know, as far as her impact fee and all of that, she's already done that. She's already got, she's a bona fide, she's a customer.
Would it be beneficial to drop the standby fee down from what it is now down to a reasonable amount?
If there's
For
an
both
impact,
owners, is what you're saying, for people who've got more than just.
Yeah, that they paid a bill on their home, but they've got excess water that they're not using.
well, the long and the short of it is there's no free lunch. That's what we're doing here tonight.
So I'm gonna give $100 just to give $100.
I, does anybody else have any thoughts on this?
I guess if she wanted, she could turn back in, but I'm not sure how you work out that credit when they, you know, if she sells a lot to somebody else, how does that work?
As of right now, the research I've done, I can sell my lot with the water, which I'm looking at that option right now. And I can get more for my lot as long as I keep the water there so they can just tie into it. So as of right now, my property value is up. I can get more for it.
Yeah, that would be my thought. And talking about impact fees, I was talking to the mayor today, and we were having a discussion about a new impact fee study. And this is just me speaking, nothing official or scientific, but since the last impact fee study was done, we have added Canaan with the new improvements of 700,000 plus the $500,000 we put in it to buy it. That's going to put that much more value into the service district. And with the increased inflation, probably doubling, we put $6 million in to start with. That's probably take us 12 to 15 million to replace that today. So you add all those numbers up and then you start dividing it out. And you want a percentage of that for a connection, you're going to find the impact fee in the $20 range, or 20,000 range. Not that we have to charge that, but that's, I think, when the numbers shake out, that's where it hits. So.
And I'm pushing for it, is it was actually even prior to operation that study was done. And I'm not sure that included Cedar Point. I wasn't there in those meetings, but did we borrow this one first and then that came afterwards? It was all the same time. All right. So the impact fee study was actually done, and it still took probably another year after that before we actually did the purchase. And so this thing is dated probably 2012, thereabouts. And because of the age of it, I just think that doing a fresh impact fee study is not only the right thing to do because we want to know. And it comes out 20,000. The good news is you're getting a deal. If it comes out 8,000, then we know. And I think either way it goes, it's good information to have. And scary information if it's a real low number, but there are, you know, it costs us more money. The thing that you have to remember is when you go down to compare this at Hurricane, some of these different communities, you know, the sidewalk out in front of your lot is what we just say is an average, 50 to 80 feet maybe, as far as the width of the lot. And so from connection to connection, it is every less than 100 feet per connection. Now, out here, you know, it's hundreds of feet. You know, you can be 200, 300 foot in between homes, and then it's a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. And it costs more money to deliver water in those circumstances when you don't have a connection every 100 feet. And so there's just, when you count how many meters we have and the miles of pipeline and compare that to another municipality that has in the same miles 4, 5, 10 times as many connections in the same miles, that's why they can operate at a lower rate.
Wish we had a good answer for you for that. Rod, do you have any thoughts on how different than what we?
Well, so you've got 4 meters, and we have a rate structure that provides for total water usage after the base rate. So I'm almost wondering in a situation like that, if you couldn't, in essence, combine those 4 meters and bill on the basis of a single base rate charge, and then whatever additional water is being used still gets paid for in the tiered rates beyond that. I don't know that that's such a terrible departure from what we normally do if those meters are all owned by a single entity.
If you is to sell those lots, though,
They
they'd have to be broken apart.
you separate them back out. And that's just a billing thing. That doesn't change the infrastructure because the 4 meters are there, they're in use. So it's just that it would change if the ownership of the individual services went to a single connection. But you still would get some money. I don't know how that would actually play out in terms of your water usage, but
It's just one lot too. It's already been combined.
right,
It was 4 lots.
right,
And that's why each one has a meter.
Right.
One. But it's been combined, so only using one meter, right? 2 of them.
So I have 2 meters that I don't use. So I'm pretty much giving the town $60
yeah,
just to give them $60
yeah.
because I'm not using those meters.
Thank
So
you very
my,
much.
my thought is if they allotted water, I would use those meters. I would use them. If we had some allotted usage to go along with their base rate, I could justify using them.
But yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. So anyway, that was just the thought that popped into my head is that if you, on a single user, you could really, you probably could do something like that. And then when the situation changes, it's like adding another connection without a connection fee because there's no infrastructure change. You just simply change the bill.
Why don't we give us a day or two and get back to us, and we'll brainstorm this a little bit rather than try to do it on the fly, and maybe we can help you out somehow.
Not to have meters, we have standby, but not to have actual meters. You're aware of all 4 meters actually have meters.
Okay,
I have a lot.
so the next question is, could it be possible to look at the rate again after 1 year? And my recommendation would be to look at our rates on an annual basis.
Yeah, regardless.
Yeah. The next question, and I think we probably partially already addressed this, was it's not a 68% increase, not a 40% increase. And yes, it is a 68% base rate.
And Ben, if you'd like, I do have the table here to show the average bill. That's the 42% increase, if you'd like me to share that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a moment. Okay, so this, if you're familiar with Excel, you know, kind of using a bit of a pivot table here, or really just a large sum. So you can see we have every customer's information here, as well as on another tab, 12 months of actual usage data. We have them broken down by meter size and what their current customer class is to calculate what revenue or what their bill would be under the current rates as well as under the proposed rates. And so by taking a look at that and filtering it down to just the residential customers, that's where we're able to figure out that average annual bill is the $48.56 and increases to $69.12 with the proposed increase of the base rate to $49. So hopefully that clarifies things for you.
So the next question was, does the rate study look at any curved expenses? And I must have fallen asleep when we covered that in my accounting classes. I'm not sure what curved expenses are.
I think they're getting saved, spend less if you can.
I think that might be what we're asking.
Well, the budget's online, and if you can find some change in it, you're welcome to point it out. We tighten that thing up.
This weekend,
Yeah.
it's probably too tight.
It's probably too tight. I agree. We're probably going to do a budget amendment throughout the year just because it's a really tight budget. The next question was, previous budget proposals included adding a new staff member. And is this appropriate when asking for a rate increase? So I'll chime in there that this year's budget does not include an additional staff member. The next question is, can the RCAC
Expand on that. So why is he asking the question if it's not?
That's a good question. This one was by Mr. Polk. Russ, if you're still on, feel free to clarify.
Well, I think there's been some discussion, but I don't think it was this year. I think it was next year, wasn't it? Another year out.
So the model had that originally. Matt, was that position taken out?
Could you repeat that? I didn't hear the first
The
part.
additional staff member that was in the model.
Yeah, so that, to kind of answer both those questions, is we did look at expenses where we could. There's not a whole lot of flexibility in the budget, but we did, with these proposed rate increases, see that really, not in the next, 2 years even could a new staff be hired with these rate increases, but instead looking at pushing that back a few more years, because as the system grows, there is a need for additional staff, even on a part-time level, but in order to, again, not double rates or go even higher, needing to push that back to reduce that current expense. And then in addition to that, Ben and I did work closely with both USDA Rural Development and the State Revolving Fund to make sure that we could be as flexible as we could with those required expenses, such as the debt service and the short-lived asset reserve contributions, to really get those as low as we could at this time, to make sure that, again, rates could be maintained as low as possible.
I don't want to downplay that or get too nerdy about this, but that was a big accomplishment that Matt did, is combining our short-lived asset replacement fund with I don't remember what RD calls it, but these two short-lived asset funds were able to be combined with permission of the USDA RD and the DPWs. So that's actually really exciting, and I'm kind of excited to move into this audit year because I get to explain that to our auditors. So that's gonna be a cool moment.
Dan, you need a wife.
I know.
He can't wait to get home, tell his wife. Seems like it.
So the next question was, can the RCAC or another third party conduct an audit based on prior decisions of the current management group? So I'll address this if you don't mind. So we are audited by a third party CPA firm on an annual basis. I believe this question is actually there was mentioned that it was specifically about the decision of the impact fee reduction. That CPA firm also looked at that documentation on the impact fee reduction. They asked for documentation on that and were satisfied with the results. So there were no findings in the audit as a result of that. So I believe that box has already been checked. The next question is, can we increase usage rates instead of base rates so people can choose to pay more if needed or make small adjustments to both?
I might address that. The reason for the base rate is it's predictable. We can chart our course better knowing that the base rate money is coming in. For example, Albuquerque, New Mexico changed their water usage rate to the point that they are in Chapter 11 presently. We can try to manipulate things by changing water rates and getting more money or less money, and people can decide to conserve more. And we're planning on $10,000 a month to pay the bills, and all of a sudden everybody turns the tap off. There's a big difference in the winter time versus August around here. And so there's just too much unpredictability in the income as far as water usage. We can't predict what it's going to be. The base rate we can.
And I might add too, that the Washington County Water Conservancy District actually encourages entities to increase usage rates in order to decrease water usage, in order to encourage conservation. You look at their 20 and 30-year models, and that's one of the tools to increase conservation, is to increase your rates. So that just supports that idea. I think it's also important with that question, Matt probably mentioned this in the presentation. The base rates are used to pay for debt service and your fixed expenses. Usage rates should cover your variable costs. So fixed revenue covers fixed expenses, variable revenue covers variable expenses. And this is what we're trying to accomplish. Another question came up: has debt forgiveness from the state been considered?
No, and I don't think the state's considered it either. In all seriousness, if we got in trouble, they would probably set payments back a ways. They would work with us in some fashion, but I have never had any state lending person that I've dealt with over the last 8 years indicate that there would be any debt forgiveness. They would be working and trying to figure things out, and maybe refinancing or whatever it took. The bill's the bill, the way I got it.
Okay. The next question is: has low or no interest rates on the original cost of the system been asked for? Our debt service, the effective interest rate is so low. The only loans that we actually pay interest on are the RD loans for the 2014 water system. Those are 3.5 and 4.5%, but the huge majority of our debt service are 0% loans from the state. Now
Yeah, we could address that. Maybe Rod would be able to voice something on those loans. I don't know if that'd be receptive to, since interest rates are dirt cheap and they are a little higher than the going rate. Would they consider that?
Yes, they absolutely would. I think state drinking water is up. But I think USDA Rural Development, which recently provided the grant money for the Canaan Springs rehabilitation, has even offered to sort of come in and take a look at our program and see if there is a funding program that would actually suit us a little bit better.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we had things put together at one point to refinance the original system in 2014. And with the savings on the refinancing, run a pipeline from Canaan to the million gallon tank at Cedar Point, roll it all in one ball wax, for lack of a better term. That is still something we can pursue.
Yeah. And when we originally did the proposal on that project, we got the connecting pipe in the funding and refinancing all of the USDA, all of the state drinking water debt service, and ended up with a less debt service on an annual basis, but a longer term of repayment. So there was it was a reasonable opportunity if you were willing to accept the longer debt service component of it, and it got you a connection which really has been on the capital improvements list since we had the opportunity come up.
Well, you and I were in discussion of how to go about this and talk to the mayor about bringing the ends together at the time of the earthquake, which was good and bad, but it gave us $700,000 to set the stage for this very thing. And so that's the direction that I think this will unfold in. So that'll be part, that the short version is, yes, we're gonna look at refinancing and rolling another project into it, coming out, paying less in the end. That's plan A.
That's all the questions that we have.
Okay.
You know, I did have a few more points, if you're okay with that.
Do what now?
I just had a few more points.
Sure, go ahead.
In just a brief presentation, kind of overall. I did have a question earlier today that said, if we distributed all of the costs of the system alone, how much would each connection cost? So debt service and operations included, our average monthly cash out the door is $36,000 per month. So if you only include metered connections, the typical customer would have to pay $96 per month on a base rate. If you included standby services, that's spread a little bit more, spread out a little bit more, and it would be $76 per month. Just two more really quick things, if you don't mind. I also looked at the service area density. So from where I live in Washington City, I've said that I can spit on my neighbor's meters. I can probably about 6 of them, right? I probably couldn't throw a rock and hit more than 1 or 2 from this building. Probably most of the neighbors are true. That is representative also. So in Apple Valley and the district's service area, we have about 21 people per square mile. And in the county, that is significantly less than everywhere. Rockville comes in a close second at 32, all the way up to over 1,100 people per square mile in St. George. So our service area is just massive. This is just a huge area.
40 square miles.
For 300 water connections. I also looked at rate comparisons. A lot of people that I've talked to as we've approached this meeting have asked, what about other communities? How does Apple Valley compare currently? And how does will Apple Valley compare if the base rates increase to $20 per month? And so here the two items in red are where Apple Valley currently is. And this is just in our little area of the county, Hurricane, Laverkin, Tokerville, and Virgin. So currently we're on the lower side. We're not the lowest, but we're kind of right in the middle. And with the $20 a month increase, this is with 3,000 gallons included. We'd be second from the top, second to Virgin. If you bump that up to 20,000 and 50,000 gallons, we're right in the middle, and we'll be towards the top with 20,000 gallons. At 50,000 gallons, we're actually right kind of in the middle again, with our current rates and with our proposed rates, because it's all a game of the mix between the base rate and your usage rates. And Tokerville, this is astonishing to me. When you're over 30,000 gallons, you're paying $6 per 1,000 gallons. So some of our people that run large gardens, they simply wouldn't be able to afford the gardens that they're running in our community with Tokerville's rates. So those are just a couple points that I wanted to make as this is considered by the board.
And along the same line, how this mixes together, we have 5 wells, we have 5 holding tanks ranging from 50,000 gallons to 1,000,000 gallons. We have miles and miles and miles of pipe. The service district covers over 40 square miles. And in all of this, other than in addition to culinary water, we have to support, and happy to do so, the fire department. We want the fire department to be able to go to any hydrant in this service district, hook onto that hydrant, and have full confidence they're going to have all the pressure and volume that they need to fight the fire. And in order to do that, we've got to have our pumps going all the time. We've got to have our tanks in good condition. We've got to have pipes that don't leak. And you start covering 40 square miles with one full-time employee to keep the cost down. I think you're buying a lot for an additional $20 a month. I realize that it's $20, but when you really sit down and think about it, there's a massive amount of
equipment, material, and work that goes into keeping this all together. And I'm amazed that Dale does as much as he does with what we give him to work with, but we haven't ever failed any state inspections. We haven't ever had any issues that anybody noticed other than us.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make a comment to that. One thing that I learned last meeting was that the district can't even afford tools. Dale has his own tools and he uses his own tools because the district can't even afford to buy any set of tools. So his tools, instead of being in his garage like a lot of ours, they're in his truck and he takes them with him. And that's how poor we run it. It's like he volunteers, says, I'll just use my tools. And every year we say, maybe we can buy him some tools. And every year we say, not this year. So that's how tight we keep it.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Okay, appreciate everybody's patience and hope the answers were complete. If we missed anything, if you want to send an email or myself, we'll personally answer it and go from there. Hopefully we hit the high spots and everybody's happy with that. So with that, I ask Mr. Billingsley to read the resolution, Big Plains Water, Resolution 2020-02, relating to the rate possible rate increase.
Right, okay, so resolution BPW 2020-02, a resolution amending the water rates for the Big Plains Water and Sewer Special Service District. Whereas the Big Plains Water and Special Service District adopted water rates as set forth by resolution 2012-02, and whereas a meeting duly called, noted, and held on the 11th day of June, the district held a meeting wherein the need was demonstrated to increase revenue in order to pay operational expenses, debt service, and to meet debt covenant obligations. And whereas at the meeting held on the 11th day of June, public hearing was held wherein all interested persons were allowed to speak for or against the proposal to increase the existing fee. And whereas the Board of Trustees listened to and took into consideration all public input on the proposed rate increase. And whereas the district board deems it necessary and appropriate to adjust the water rates as follows. Service base rate and standby fee, $49 per month. Usage fees, 0 to 5,000, $1.50 per 1,000 gallons. Tier 2 is 5 to 12,000 gallons, $1.75 per 1,000 gallons. Tier 3 is 12,000 to 25,000 gallons, is $2 per 1,000 gallons. Tier 4 is 25,000 to 35,000 gallons at $2.25 per 1,000 gallons. Tier 5 is 35 to 45,000 at $2.50 per 1,000 gallons. Tier 6 is 45,000 gallons at $2.75 per 1,000 gallons. Whereas at a meeting of the district duly called, notice, and held on the 11th day of June 2020, and upon motion duly made and seconded, now therefore it is hereby resolved that the district at the aforementioned water rates shall be charged and effective on July 1st, 2020. And I would also add that in the motion to increase the additional commercial rates proportionally.
Anyone wish to make a motion on this, please?
I had a question on that. So we've listed out all the tiers, but there's no difference in that tier from what our current rate is. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so commercially, it'd be the same tiers as well. We're just talking about adding additional, like proportion meaning $20 on top of that, or proportionate meaning percentage wise?
68%.
So 68% increase on the rate. So I'll make a motion that we adopt the resolution BPW 2020-02 with the condition that we're increasing the other meter sizes proportionately based on the percentage of 68%.
Yeah.
Vote.
Aye.
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 Jerry?
Aye.
Okay. Unanimous approval of the resolution.
discussion and possible action, on adoption of the, this 2021 annual budget resolution, BPW 2020-43.
So, if I might add to this, so state code allows for a public hearing on both a rate increase and a, annual budget. So that can be combined into a single, public hearing. I failed to mention that in the public hearing, so it may be prudent at this time to do a public hearing, to go back to the public hearing, this time pertaining to the annual budget. That would.
Okay, we will open this for public hearing relating to the budget of the 2020-2021. That's what okay, yeah.
I guess I would call for any public comments on Zoom. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, that would be the on the 20, on the current budget, right? 2021.
Next year's budget.
Next year budget. Okay, then it's open for public comment, Zoom or audience. Any member of the board have anything to discuss on that?
No, I've looked over the budget.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to adopt that. Do I need to close the public hearing?
Yeah, close public hearing.
Okay. You make the motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the 2021 annual budget as noted.
A second. Vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you, Jerry. Okay, then we'll have a public hearing for, I'd like to open a public hearing for budget fiscal year 2019, 2020. Any comment from the audience or from the?
Well, I'll make a comment. I'd love to have you comment on this one. And everybody left too soon. I almost think this should have been an agenda item ahead of the other budget. And I'm looking for my notes on it. What in the world did I pack into that budget? Anyway, but I remember from memory. What we're doing on this budget amendment that is, to me, hilarious is that we have spent a little bit more money than what we had budgeted last year. And so we've had to increase some of our line items to cover those increases in our budgeted items. And then to cover those expenses, to make this a compliant budget. A compliant budget means that it balances. We've taken our $234,000 impact fees and we've increased them to $241,000. And we have 2 more weeks left in our budget. And we have to do this to be compliant. Yet we know we're only got 55,000 in impact fees collected, but we're going to pass this thing. And so the difference is 241 to that $55,000. That's $168,000. That's how far in the hole we went last year, basically, for the perfect world kind of budget as far as the district goes. And if that isn't evidence for a rate increase, I don't know what is. It just tells you how in trouble the budget is. Anyway, that's my comment on it. I know we have to pass it, it's legal, We don't have to pass it. I found out from Ben Day, we can not pass this budget, and then we get written up by our auditors because we didn't have a compliant budget passed. And, you know, they slap our hands, and the state auditor's office calls us, says you guys have to pass a compliant budget, and it's just a game that has to be played. So I get it, you know, but it's just comical when you look at what we're doing today. Is we're projecting we're going to get $241,000 in impact fees. Well, we know there's no way in the world to do it, but anyway. Yeah. Anyway, I make a motion that we, I guess you got to close it out with public comment.
Okay, where are we at here? Let's close the public comment period for the 2019-2020 budget. Okay, discussion. We've already gone through what?
We're on 11.
Possible action on adopting the fiscal year 2019-2020 annual budget, resolution 2020-04. Anybody want to make a motion to approve that?
I make a motion that we adopt the amended budget for 2019 to 2020. Resolution BPW to 2020-04.
Aye.
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 Okay, now it's time for an open public meeting training session by Mr. Billingsley.
And this, I'll preface this, we'll make it quick, as quick as possible. I have to apologize. This is something we normally do in January or February, especially if we have a new board member. We anticipated that we'd be able to do this in a public meeting down in St. George in March, and that meeting got canceled. Now we're right at the end of our fiscal year, and the auditors check for this. So we've got to do our meetings and get our certificates signed and get through the books. So this unfortunately is just produced by the state auditor's office. They're full of people with personalities like me. So it's only 10 minutes.
Especially auditors.
Yeah, exactly.
And when was the last training?
So what's the Open and Public Meetings Act?
So the council did it in this a few months ago. You conducted it about a year ago for the board.
Okay, so that's.
Yeah, they've never since.
Yeah.
Somebody wrote, what?
It's the state law that ensures government actions.
I gotta pee.
I apologize, I'm not going to refer this.
Thanks for.
Yeah. Take care.
No, we just start.
Sit down, you're supposed to
Yeah, he's lying. You don't have to.
Are you serious? What do you guys got? What? Just being a joker?
listen. Training.
Oh, I thought you were going to skip that.
Jared, I muted you.
Thanks for that graph, dude. That was very informative. I appreciate that.
Good luck, gentlemen. Hope you all get
Keep
A's.
in mind that this video is an overview, and exceptions may exist based on your entity type. So what's considered an open and public meeting? It's when a governing body majority meets to discuss or act upon government business. It includes the meetings sometimes referred to as workshops or executive sessions. Regular meetings, public hearings, electronic meetings, and emergency meetings are all open and public meetings. Open and public meetings don't include chance or social meetings. A public hearing is a type of open and public meeting where citizens have a reasonable opportunity to speak. Public hearings happen when a government adopts a budget or imposes or increases taxes or fees. An electronic meeting is a type of open and public meeting that's convened electronically, such as via phone or the internet. Remember, the governing body must adopt a resolution, rule, or ordinance allowing the governing electronic meetings. An open and public meeting may be closed to discuss any of the following: a person's character, competence, or health, security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, collective bargaining, litigation, purchase, sale, or lease of property if an open discussion would prevent the entity from completing the transaction on the best terms, investigations of criminal misconduct, and private or protected information for the Utah Procurement Code, including trade secrets. 2/3 of the governing body need to vote yes to close a meeting. Quick math lesson. 2 divided by 3 equals 66.7%. Let's say your governing body has 5 members. If 3 out of the 5 members vote yes, that equals 60%, which is not equal to or greater than 66.7%, which means you're 1 member short and instead need 4 out of 5 members to vote yes. During a closed meeting, a governing body can introduce someone applying to fill an elected position, discuss filling a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, discuss the character, competence, or health of a person whose name was submitted for consideration to fill a midterm vacancy or temporary absence, or approve any ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, contract, or appointment. If a closed meeting is discussing a person's character, competence, or health, or security personnel, devices, or systems deployment, no recording or minutes are required. However, the presiding member needs to sign a sworn written statement stating such. If the closed meeting is held for any other reason, a recording must be made. Emergency meetings may be held to discuss an urgent matter due to unforeseen circumstances. In order to hold the meeting, the best notice that's feasible is provided at the time, location, and topics to be considered. An attempt is made to contact all governing body members, and the governing body majority approves the meeting. Entities that hold regular meetings need to provide notice at least annually of the year's meeting schedule. As always, the notice must include date, time, and place. For entities that don't hold regularly scheduled regular meetings, 24 hours notice must be provided. All meetings, whether regularly scheduled in advance over the course of the year or scheduled as needed, must provide no less than 24 hours notice of meeting agendas. If a public hearing is held, public notice requirements change. Make sure to distinguish between regular meeting notice requirements and public hearing notice requirements. For regular meetings, an entity is only required to notify a newspaper and doesn't need to pay to publish a notice. For public hearings, notice must be published in at least one issue of a newspaper. If a newspaper of general circulation isn't available, written notice is posted in 3 public places within the entity's boundaries. Regular meetings require 24 hours notice. Public hearings require 7 days notice. For both regular meetings and public hearings, written notice must be posted at the principal office of the governing body, or, if no such office exists, at the building where the meeting will be held. Governing bodies must also provide notice of open and public meetings on the public notice website at publicnotice.utah.gov. By posting on the website and providing the email of the local newspaper, governing bodies can also meet the requirement to notify a newspaper. However, other requirements such as publishing in a newspaper still apply. Typically, posting on the public notice website is done by the records officer, recorder, or clerk. However, it's the governing body's responsibility to ensure notice is provided. State Archives has prepared a training manual and quick guide for owners and posters, as well as training videos that can be accessed at their website at archives.utah.gov. If your entity is increasing a fee or undergoing truth in taxation for a property tax increase, be aware that there are additional notice and posting requirements. Public meeting agendas need to include reasonably specified topics to be considered, with each topic listed under a separate agenda item on the meeting agenda. The governing body may not consider a topic in an open meeting that wasn't on the agenda. If a new topic not on the agenda is raised by the public during an open meeting, the governing body may discuss the topic. However, final action may not be taken on the new topic during that meeting. Meeting minutes and an audio recording are required for all open meetings, with limited exceptions. When an open or closed meeting is required to be recorded, it must be unedited and contain all portions of the meeting. Recordings of open meetings must be made available within 3 days. Every entity needs to establish procedures for the governing body's approval of minutes. Pending minutes are written minutes prepared in draft form and are subject to change before being approved by the governing body. Pending minutes must contain a clear indication such as a draft or pending watermark, that the governing body hasn't yet approved the minutes and that they're subject to change. Pending minutes must be made available within 30 days. Approved minutes are written minutes of a meeting that have been approved by the governing body. Approved minutes are the official record of the meeting and must be made available within 3 business days. Whoever is responsible for taking the minutes during meetings, typically the records officer, recorder, or clerk, needs to be familiar with what Oppmann requires be contained in the minutes. When a governing body closes a meeting, the following must be publicly announced and entered into the minutes of the open meeting at which the closed meeting was approved. The reason or reasons for holding the closed meeting, the location where the closed meeting will be held, and the vote of each member of the governing body, either for or against the motion to close the meeting. The recording and any minutes must include the date, time, and location of the meeting, the names of the governing body members present and absent, and the names of all others present, except where disclosure would infringe on the confidentiality necessary to fulfill the original purpose of closing the meeting. For more information, access our local government resource center at resources.auditor.utah.gov.
Thank you.
I have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, you have to unmute Jerry. Let's see if I can figure out how to do
Aye. Aye.
that.
Thanks, Jerry.
This damn thing.
You're gonna set it better myself.
It wouldn't let me hit it. I'd hit it and go right back up.